Welcome to this 98th session of Art Matters. Very soon we'll be completing a century. We have been at it relentlessly, in spite of the fact that Saint Valentine posthumously has intervened this evening. And for that she needs all the possible condemnation from her side. This is a multi-arts forum, and we have been doing things which relate to music, visual arts, literature, cinema, etc. Today, we have asked 4 of our friends to tell us how to look at art. Looking at art is a complicated matter. Many years ago, I was instrumental in organizing a series of talks called Looking at Art, in which we used to request one person to talk about one painting or one work of art. And we had quite an interesting array of people who came for that, which included Dilip Chitre, Kumar Shani, Krishan Khanna, etc. We might start it again for the simple reason there's too much art being looked at but not paid attention to. Most people, if you notice in the art shows and art fairs, pass by. They look at it, but they do not really pay any attention to it. I'll start with an episode that took place many years ago in Bharat Bhavan. We had a chief minister who came, and he was incidentally from Gujarat, a fairly civilized person. And he looked at a painting of Ambadas. And he said, he must have looked at it for about half a minute, and he said, "Iska kya matlab?" I was conducting him, so I kept quiet. I said, "Sir, ye matlab nahi, this painting is not about anything, it is itself." He said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "I mean exactly what I said. This painting is not about something, it is itself." He was of course not convinced, and we moved on. And then I asked him, "Sir, are you interested in classical music?" Yeah, I'm a great fan of Hindustani classical music." And "Who is your favorite singer?" He said, "Bhimsen Joshi." Now those were the days when they were long playing records, 32 minutes or 32 and a half minutes or something. So I told him that, "Sir, you must have heard his Malkos, Paglagan de Bandish." Yeah, 20 times I must have. I like it so much. I said, "Sir, what is the meaning of Rag Malkos?" He said, "Kya matlab?" मैंने कहा, "साहब, आपने 10 घंटे राग मालकोस भीमसेन जोशी का सुना है। मैंने आपसे पूछा कि राग मालकोस का क्या मतलब?" बोले, "मतलब क्या? हमको अच्छा लगता है।" हमको, "और आपने आधा मिनट अंबादास की पेंटिंग देखी और पूछ लिया कि उसका क्या मतलब?" हाँ, there's a point you have made. He became friendly, and later he used to ring me up once in a while just to, "क्या रे, मैं भीमसेन जोशी सुन रहा था तो मैंने सोचा आपसे बात करता हूँ, क्या हाल है, ये वो वगैरह." So there is a lot there is a fact of looking at art, and there's another fact of reading a work of art. When you start reading, and this happens all too often with the narrative kind of art, the figurative kind of art. You start reading it. You say, "Oh, here's a tree." And the moment you start reading it, you stop looking at it, because you start looking at colors, combinations, resonances, dialogue that might be taking place between shapes and things. So you start concentrating on the so-called narrative. So you start reading, you have stopped looking. So there are these issues, and here we have four people who have been looking at art for a long time, and some of them even writing, some of them not writing but collecting, some of them promoting art in different ways. So we have Vandana Kalra, who's the art critic for the Indian Express these days. We have Jyoti Kathpalia, who teaches English in a Delhi college, but is interested and has been editing what, Art and Soul or Art and Deed? Yeah. And we have Nitin, Bhayana, who's a great collector and one time used to publish wonderful books. In fact, the first book on Raza was published by him. And Anubhav Nath, who has taken to the tribal art in a big way and runs a gallery. So we have four persons telling you how to look at art, or at least telling us how they look at whatever art they look at, and what are their experiences. Well, the rules of the game is that each one of them can speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, 12 minutes will be ideal, and then if they have anything, they will ask each other, and that will be time for that. And then, of course, to this very select audience, on a St. Valentine evening, to listen to. The evening is about loving arts. It's not about loving human beings. And through loving art, hopefully you also love human beings, not the other way around. So we will start with Anubhav Nath, because he seemed to be dealing, and Anubhav Nath, then Jyoti Kathpalia, then Vandana Kalra, and Nitin Bhayana. So, and you keep I'm going to sit in the audience. My role is over.
स्लाइड चेंज करने के लिए हाँ जी आपकी स्लाइड को मैं खोल देता हूँ हाँ यही है फुल सेट करना है हाँ फुल स्क्रीन हाँ ठीक है ये भी ब्लैंक है पहला अच्छा ब्लैंक है पहला ब्लैंक ये चेंजर का पता ये हो रहा है ठीक वो तो इधर से भी ठीक है मैं लाया था आपके लिए ये वाला ये ठीक थैंक यू
Thank you so much. I was actually not prepared to go on first. I think that was, but here I am. So you know the thing about, we spoke about looking at art, reading art, and all those things. So I tried to do something a little differently for this talk. And you know, when we talk about Indian art, or you know, we can talk about the Shilp Shastra, the Vedas, of which it is a part, and so many other theories and ways and personal ways that people have of looking at art, observing pieces. There's so many things. But I wanted to share a little bit about my own personal journey into the indigenous arts, and how I have been looking at art, and how I've been trying to make people look at that same art with a different lens. So, you know, I have been into the whole, my art journey is about, I want to say now, 2 decades old, and I have been actively in the indigenous, tribal, folk art space for the last probably 12-15 years, I think. And so one thing that I found was that when people were looking at the indigenous arts, the lens suddenly changed. You know, it was, it just became more rustic and rural, and people were not looking at it in the same way that they would look at mainstream urban contemporary art. You know, they would think that this was like a poorer cousin maybe, or just not in the same way, and it did not deserve the same platform or place, which was something that kind of did not sit well with me, because I really feel that where tribal and traditional arts are concerned, the aesthetic is very much ours. You know, that's a very natural aesthetic that we as Indians would respond to, because that is what we have grown up with. That's what we've seen around us in, in the small things that you see at homes, or in pujas, or pandals, everywhere. It's like that basic aesthetic that we all respond to. But so my journey in the arts started with contemporary, mainstream urban contemporary. I did some projects at Bihar jail, which took me to jail multiple times with various artists. Then there was a long dawn project I did around Gandhi.
You said Tihar jail in a manner as if you have been there.
Yes. So actually, this Tihar jail thing was a 3-year-long project, and I went multiple times as with various artists, and we actually started out with like art therapy classes for the inmates, and I have to tell you, it was one of the most peaceful places because one thing is like it's like a huge campus, fully green, no cell phones allowed. So it's really good for contemplation, especially when you're there voluntarily. So so that was a project that I did. Then after that, there was a project around Gandhi, which made me travel along the route of Sabarmati Ashram to Dandi multiple times. And all of these culminated in exhibitions. And I stumbled into the whole indigenous art space with an exhibition that I saw in Habitat Center. And it was, done by some artists at the Open Palm Court. And I happened to be there, and they seemed very, they seemed very low, and there was like people came in, there was lots of bargaining happening, which is something which is probably not just restricted to the indigenous arts, but it's across the board potentially. But it was just their whole, how they were feeling about it made me want to do something with them, and that's how I kind of started. And then so to kind of go ahead with it, I thought what we need to do is potentially see how we can look at this category in a different way. And to look at this category in a different way, in my mind, what was needed was to kind of make it more precious. It will remain accessible, but at the same time, it needed to become more special, more precious in whatever way possible. So I started my journey in this category with firstly initiating an award, which was the Ojas Art Award, and we partnered with the Jaipur Literature Festival, because we did not really even have like databases of artists, etc., and to find out where they lived and how to approach them, how to find them. So I felt an award would be a good way to start, and especially with someone like the Jaipur Literature Festival, an organization like the Jaipur Literature Festival, which had a really vast outreach. And so the first award that happened was in 2015, and here we are at the Ojas Art Award 2015, and so you were there presenting the award for us that year. And so the first one was in Gond art, because that is a very popular category among the tribal arts. And so through the award, we were able to actually get a lot of artists in the forefront. And we were able to collect database for ourselves and to know where these artists are and what they're doing. And I actually, when I look at this picture, I remember Bhaju when he was going on stage at this particular award, and he's internationally recognized. He's had solo shows he had already had solo shows in museums overseas, and because there's like a sea of people, like thousands of people sitting in the audience, and he was like, कि मैंने कभी इतने लोग नहीं देखे हैं और अपने देश में ऐसा हो रहा है हमारे साथ, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है. Bhaju went on to get the Padma Shri and all of that. There have been so many things that have happened for him. Including right next door at the Lodi colony, where he became then in 2019 the first Indian tribal artist to have his own wall at the Lodi Colony Art District. That's an exhibition that we did of his. That's at the gallery, and so that's the other thing that we try to do, is that follow up the award and other things with like solo exhibitions for the artists, with publications, etc. Again, this is, the following year we did it for Madhubani art. We got an art fair booth for the first time in 2022, a solo booth for Santosh Kumar Das, which became the first solo booth for a living artist from a traditional art background. So we've been consistently doing these awards and everything with different categories, because this has given us an opportunity to work with the artist directly. In fact, this year, right now, yesterday, one of our other artists, Ram Singh Urveti, he has received the Tulsi Samman by the government of Madhya Pradesh, and yesterday was the felicitation ceremony. We have Professor B.N. Goswami with us at the JLF, and he was always very, very supportive of whatever we did with the arts at JLF and the award. Just, the Mayur and Tushar Vaida, they've gone on to being at the Sochi Trinale and at various other Biennales and Trinales across the world, including their works have been acquired by mainstream museums. Again, they were right here at the Lodi Colony as well. My journey through Ojas Art Award again, where we have different artists being felicitated and we are working with. So this is about my journey till now and how I've been looking at this category in a different kind of a way. But I really feel that it's important for others to join into this and help us elevate these arts and make them more mainstream and more acceptable in a more precious way, because they truly deserve to be there. And we also need some sort of support from different categories / stakeholders who can help us even take this further. In fact, the way this art or the Aboriginal arts are seen in Australia is so very different from how we look at our own indigenous arts. And it's not just about it's not just about valuation and price points. It's about the entire category being respected for what it truly is, and for the potential that it holds, and for the intangible cultural asset that it is for us as a people, and our own aesthetic and cultural identity goes ahead with these arts. Thank you for listening in, and thank you so much for having me here.
For someone to just take this up.
You need this? Is it here? Oh, okay. Sorry.
इसका जो है स्लाइड चेंज करके चेंजर को देख लेंगे डुप्लीकेट या मिरर
हाँ
मिरर या डुप्लीकेट इसको हटा दो
तुम्हारा
Screen mirror.
आ रहा तो पहले तो नहीं आ रहा मिररिंग वही बताया उनको मैंने मिरर
Display. So sorry about this.
नहीं आ रहा
Mirror. Okay. Thank you.
थैंक यू अल्लाह
Just a minute. So I will.
चेंजर स्लाइड चेंजर
मैं इसी से कर दूंगी फास्ट.
नहीं देखते हैं उधर
और फिर और प्रॉब्लम ना हो
ये
जाए.
प्रॉब्लम होगी तो सबको देख लीजिए फुल स्क्रीन करना फुल स्क्रीन करना रुकिए रुकिए
It is going. So how do I go back?
रुकिए इससे ही जाएगा
हाँ ठीक है, कोई बात नहीं, मैं आगे कर दूंगी. Is it okay now? ये full screen आ रहा है?
जी फुल स्क्रीन
Okay. I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Ashok ji, for getting me here and giving me a chance to express my views. I was promised 15 to 20 minutes, and I beg your indulgence if I'll go a bit fast, but if you want me to go slowly, I will. Please do remind me if I'm going too fast, but I do want to cover a range of topics, and I will start with the topic, of course, looking at art, between the image and the eye, art, culture, meaning, and beyond. So I am going to, being an academic as well as an art curator and critic, writing on art, for me, the act of reading and the act of looking are almost coming very close to each other. And looking, in a way, is also reading because we have our own cultural, social, political leanings and presuppositions. But I will also look at this in another way towards the end of my discussion, which will be how the act of reading can and does move towards the act of looking. So the history and theory, I'm going to just quickly sum up a bit of some of the theories about art, about the way of looking at art. So the history and theory of looking at art, how inevitable or dismissible is it? Do we look at art in terms of qualities of the medium, technique, subject, planimetric separations, perspectives, colors, textures? Or is it just to do with the artist and trying to glean what the artist was thinking when they made the artwork? Or is the artist out of the picture and the artwork and looking denotes the presence of the viewer and the object, that is the artwork? Is it a fair hypothesis to say that the only way that an object can be made lesser of an object is to look at the intentionality of the artist? By that I mean that, are we objectifying art, or are we looking at the artist's intentions and therefore making it as a bridge between the viewer and the artist? In this case, the artwork becomes a kind of communication and conversation, or is it that the artwork a fetish or an object that is interpreted through the subjectivity, psychology and experience of the viewer? And if that is so, then is the artwork, like religion and psychoanalysis, a retrospective looking, a means to confront repressed feelings and to heal? Or finally, can the act of looking be a purely presuppositionless looking? Can the pure consciousness of experience, the single corridor between the consciousness and the stillness and silence of the work of art, be a means to something transcendent? It is true that art invites us to look, to engage and to reflect. But having said that, and starting from this, it is also true that the act of looking is not simple. There are various factors that come into play. For example, the context that is shaped by the personal, social, cultural positioning, and always the subtle infiltration of the lens of ideology through which we willy-nilly look at and interpret the world around us, which we may not consciously realize. In this discussion, we explore the complexities of looking and also looking beyond. I'm going to draw from John Berger's ways of seeing and B.N. Goswami's insights on the act of seeing, culminating in an analysis of Amrita Shergill's Young Girls, Two Girls, I'm going to go wider. I'm going to look at Yves Klein's untitled Blue Monochrome, The Void. I'm going to look at Raza's Bindu Nath. Together, these perspectives illuminate the multifaceted nature of visual engagement and challenge us to reconsider how we approach art. One of the most influential theorists who discussed ways of seeing art is John Berger. His ways of seeing, also made into a BBC series, fundamentally altered the way we understand art and the act of observation. Berger posited that seeing is an active rather than passive process, deeply rooted in societal context and prevailing ideologies. He identified some significant aspects in the dynamics of looking. Berger highlights the impact of context on interpretation. Berger takes from Benjamin's concept of the artwork's aura, a mystical and unique presence, bestowed by its unique placement in its original place, a museum or a cathedral, but the reproduction and repetition of the artwork in numerous public places also serves to de-hegemonize the art, removing it from closed areas and opening them to public view and multiple interpretations. Berger's critique of the male gaze underscores the role of power in shaping visual narratives. It is from this perspective that I'll be analyzing the fact and gesture of looking at art. Berger notes that traditional Western art often portrays women as objects of male desire, presenting them as subjects to be observed rather than as active participants. He specifically goes into the tradition of the Western nude and sees how the female is shown as looking at the viewer in a gaze that accepts and rather embodies objectification and passive language. That this is related to acquisition and possession from the Renaissance and the traditions in oil paints is ample evidence of the interdependence of art on the context in which it is generated. This invites critical attention, but also the broader structures that inform how we see. While Berger's analysis mostly focuses on the cultural and ideological constructs that influence looking, Berger also says that in the reproduction of the artwork, the stillness and silence of that the viewers, what he's trying to say is that when the viewer is looking in the gallery at the work of art, there is a stillness and silence of the work that reaches the viewer, and there is a corridor, quote unquote, he says, that is established. So, of course, he says there are pros and cons of the repetition and reproduction and viewing the work in its original place, a museum, a cathedral, or something. There is another trajectory that B.N. Goswami takes of the idea itself of looking at art. He stresses on the deep study and time that each painting and artwork demands of the viewer and the rewards in discovering hidden meanings and the surprise that each act of deep seeing can lead to. B.N. Goswami goes further into the intimate connection between the viewer and the artwork. So whereas on one hand he believes in the importance of historical details and the artist's socio-historical cultural placement, he also gives ample space to the act of seeing as an independent activity and almost hints at the zone of deeper, almost meditative observation. This has also been talked, as I said, by Berger, but the inferences then that lead to are remarkable. Being firmly situated in art historical, political, social, cultural discourses as theorists, there is also that zero degree that is referred to. This can be perhaps seen with a greater ease in abstractions in art, where the intuitive and the automatic seems to be expressed and created, and where language and suppositions to some extent can be deprioritized, enabling the eye to look beyond the socio-cultural vestments to that which is supremely individual and yet universal. A vision that can glimpse the zero degree, a term that Yves Klein, a French artist, used to refer to a space of pure abstraction, a void that holds no aesthetic or emotional weight, where color itself is dematerialized, allowing the viewer to experience art without preconceived notions. This can be a state of pure absence, or its dialogic metaphysical opposite, pure presence, free from any pre-existing conventions or beliefs. Amrita Shergill. So now I'm going to just look quickly at two paintings of Amrita. This is not clear at all. Okay. Do we need to switch off a light? Okay, but I can't read them. One light, please switch it on. Could you, yeah. I still can't read, sorry. Can you switch on one more light? Oh, my phone. I don't have it. Okay, so whereas, now, if we are looking at Amrita Shergill's Young Girls 1932, and two girls, they exemplify how art engages viewers on multiple levels and critically engages with the way that we look at art and we engage with art. In a formal analysis, if we have to look at this painting from a formal analysis, we're going to look at it from the first thing that we see, as I pointed out in the arrows, is they are the preponderance of the vertical lines that you see right from the back panel to, to the way the whole painting itself is in this vertical mode and so on. But the furniture, of course, you can see the furniture. There are the horizontal lines which are few but which can be seen in the window. The diagonal lines are balanced by the paneling on the wall. Now, if you see the diagonal lines, they are unconsciously they appeal to us and they tell us the way they are in opposite symmetrical contiguity. And you can also see that in the earlier, in this particular, the diagonal of the panel is not in sync with the diagonal of the hand. But if you see how she has worked out the diagonal up, on the top part of the panel, she's made it rough, she's tried, in a way that it comes contiguous to the diagonals of the hand. So in a way, I found it very interesting, the way the composition, how the artist looks at the composition and is changing the composition, and could be subconscious, could be conscious, but how the reader is taking it in terms of how these two women are involved in a kind of interesting, intimate conversation, and the lines are also telling the same story. Shergill plays with the top of the panel, and she's making it into a kind of a rough symmetry. The plate of fruits that you see, they are, in the hands of the darker toned girl. They add a still life, Cezanne-like perspective. In the back panel, of course, you're going to see the pattern which is prevalent. And, but let's just move quickly. I'm getting a bit stressed because of the time. So the perspective systems, if you look, the canvas is is a two-dimensional thing, and of course the artists, through their own, through technical, academic realism, they try to get perspective into the paintings. So the idea of overlapping is very clear here. If you see the foot overlapping with the fair girl overlapping with the foot of the darker girl. So this is giving way to a kind of a recessional space that you see. The light-haired girls, the light-haired girl's foot obscures the foot of the other girl. There is a planimetric separation where the background, foreground and recessional space is identified. The shoulder, it is, in the orthogonal lines, points to the recessional space. The way the shoulder is turned, it's pointing to a space beyond. The table is seen to be now in the foreground. So this painting doesn't have a really deep background. There is a table here which is actually telescopically coming towards the reader's vision and almost intruding into the reader. Again, the perspective are very Cezanne-like. So this is establishing, what this particular table and the elbow which is coming towards us is trying to establish an intimacy of the painting towards the reader, not towards the viewer. But not just that, you will also see that the viewer is placed at a parallel perspective. He's not viewing, or she's not viewing the painting from below or from the top. So that also establishes an intimacy with the painting. There are, of course, these light and dark soft color effects. The position of the viewers is like almost parallel. Amrita Shergill, of course, now if we have just now looked at the formal analysis of this painting in terms of composition, lines, perspective, planimetric separation, recessional space. But what about the contextual? If we look at the contextual, we know that she was born in 1913, as all, if you look at B.N. Goswami, Berger, to know the artist context and the context of the viewer. So she was a woman artist in the earlier 20th century, and she had to be a mix of unconventionality, boldness, artistic fervor, and living on the interstices and boundaries. Being a traveler, never fully integrated in the West or in India, but continually feeling a longing, an urge that beckoned her. Her unconventionality and interactions in the bohemian circles of Paris were reflected in her artworks. Shergill's early years were in Budapest and then in India. At the age of 16, she set sail for Paris. The painting Young Girls was created by Shergill in 32, and she won an award for it. It was displayed in the salon. Two young girls are, here they are seated. There is a kind of, if you look, what I want you to note, and I'm not going to read here, I'm just going to skip, is that if you're looking at it from the colonial perspective, done in 1932, Shergill was just 19 years old at that time, and she did this painting. She had gone for her studies in Paris. And you see the colonial binary sort of turned. So you see the dark girl, very self-possessed, beautifully dressed, necklace in place. And you see the light-toned girl, one breast exposed, one shoe undone, hair in disarray with a comb in her hand. And the normal colonial expectation would be the reverse, of the completely controlled, white person. And of course, go deeper into the context and you'll see that perhaps she based this painting on her sister-in-law, and Dennis Poitras, who was her French friend. And I think Yashodhara ji is sitting here. And in her book on Amrita, she says that they are, and very interestingly, that they are facets of her own personality. The two facets of her own personality, which is also really fascinating. So, if we are looking at this, and we move further to her painting, which is Two Girls. This was done in 1939, and again, I'm not going to do a formal analysis, but just a contextual one. She had just come back from Hungary in 1938. She started this painting in 38, completed it in 39, and just look at how the binaries are reinstated here. Look at the way the dark girl has got this cloth over her, and she's shy, she's a little, and look at the proprietorial attitude or patronizing or whatever, the way the other girl, the white girl, has her hand around her. Having said that, as I said, that there was a lot of contradiction between, ambiguity in Amrita Shergill. It was very interesting the way she is going against the heterosexual normativity. She's showing women-to-women relationships, and perhaps this is based, the fairer skinned girl is based on her own relationship with Edith Lang, a pianist. So yes, both the paintings is, also remarkable in both the paintings and in others is Shergill's consistent paintings of women friendships and bondings, which was absolutely radical at that particular moment in time. The girls are presented also, despite their nakedness, not as objects of desire for the male voyeur. In this way, Shergill's work aligns with Berger's call to question the dynamics of power. So there are, so this painting, of course, looking at art, then it exists at multiple temporal levels. The more we linger and return to it, the more we discover hidden layers. A comparison of the artworks preceding or succeeding it can also generate interesting continuities, breakages, and evolutions, as we've seen. This is what leads me to the last part of my submission to the discussion here. Talking in terms of formal and content analysis as well as a deep observation and looking at the artwork, there's still one aspect that many artists have grappled with, and that is the meditative, the immaterial, and the transcendent. The phenomenological perspective, which tangentially aligns with the idea of degree zero, and the utterly spontaneous, intuitive automatism. I would like to briefly touch upon the art of French artist Yves Klein, arguably one of the first conceptual artists born in 1928. He passed at the young age of 34, but left behind a legacy of intense artistic genius. His signature international Klein Blue was created as a way of dematerializing and evoking the boundless immateriality that is the verso of the material world. Color for Klein was then a way to move beyond the material and glimpse the unbounded freedom of being relinquished by the metrics of the mappable world. Being influenced by Rosicrucianism and Zen Buddhism, his ideas of nothingness and void, as bestowing infinite freedom, developed, and his exhibition, The Void at Gallery Iris Cla. So all he did was paint the walls white, and the viewer had to come and see and experience the feeling of the void, which was also the feeling of an infinite. And just before he passed away, he actually said that I'm just going into a world, I'm going into the infinite. So there is this compulsion, this impulsion for the viewer to experience, and that is somewhat, I feel, also the genius of art, that the viewer and the artist both go beyond the physical and, the transcendent or the infinite or the zero, shunyata. The void, so let me just go. The experience offered to the viewers that was that of a void where each viewer could rethink of the ideas of responding to the artwork in terms of pure introspection. Why this is significant in my discussion is that it turns from the dynamic of the artist to artwork, to reception, and finally to the glimpse of the consciousness as confronting the infinite and the void. And I'll just come to the last part. I'm sorry for taking your time, but it's just 2 more minutes, bear with me. This takes us to the dimension of viewing art as a metaphysical experience, as a possible gateway to the infinite. Something that I also see in Raza's painting, Bindu Nad. The Nad is a sound heard in the ear in the process of deep meditation. Nad is the resonance of the supreme word or the unstruck sound, the primordial sound of all creation, a subtle inner sound, a state that anticipates the deep meditative state, which is beyond the physical dreaming, waking or sleeping. This is the metaphysical state. The artwork of Raza can be seen from various standpoints. To a person who doesn't know the meaning of Bindu Nad, he can look at it as a window into the endless space. He can look at it as a stone thrown in a pond and the ripples coming out. But at each stage, if you connect it to Bindu Nad, you can also see the reverberations and the bindu, the germ of creativity right in the middle, So there is, as I said, the act of looking, the act of feeling, the act of your consciousness establishing a corridor with the painting, and only then can you get that sense of, yes, this is what I got from this piece of work and this is what I got from the artwork. So hence the act of looking can stimulate. Here I can also say the one final thing that I noticed when I saw this there was this exhibition at LTC. And so this artwork it seemed to be pregnant with sound. It gave me an effect of synesthesia. So the act of looking is my final submission, also can become the act of hearing. If you manage to take away the present contextual elements and you remove it from your consciousness, you can actually, and I'm not the only, Kandinsky, others who viewed art as synesthetic. So the act of looking then, it almost transforms into hearing the sound that is pregnant and almost heard in the silence of the exhibition space. In the artworks thus under consideration, we try to see a formal analysis of the artworks leading to a socio-cultural analysis. These are a part of the way we look at art. Moving further, we've also tried to look at art from another metaphysical zone of spiritual consciousness, experience, the stimulation of other senses, synesthesia. Ultimately, looking is not just about observation, but about participation. Whether we are uncovering context, exploring cultural histories, or embracing ambiguity, the act of seeing transforms how we understand not just art, but the world itself. And in the last analysis, also enables us to transcend the worldly and the material into the void, shunyata, or the infinite, as we choose to see. Thank you. Sorry for being late. Really sorry for that.
So I'd like to thank Ashok ji and the Raza Foundation, to hold this discussion on looking at art, because I think at some level all of us are looking at art in different capacities and with varying engagements. But ironically though, I think you can't hear, no? नहीं मैंने जानबूझ के मैंने जानबूझ के किया था. So ironically, I think the starting point of the discussion can be a question like, are we looking at art enough? Are we appreciating art enough? And unfortunately, I think the answer to that is probably not. In India particularly, we are living in a country where there's hardly any museum culture. When we look at school curriculum, the children are hardly taught anything about art, art history, how to view art, how to appreciate art, let alone go into the finer nuances. So, why I'm talking about this is that it is in this context that I'm looking at art as a journalist. In my presentation, I'll talk about the vantage point of a journalist working in such a scenario. So, as an art journalist then, my role also extends to beyond personal engagement. It also involves introducing artworks to my readers through an informed lens. So what I'm doing is I'm deeply engaging with the works myself, but I'm arming them with enough information to also develop their own viewpoint. I will talk about the artwork, the title, the medium, what was the context of making it, why did the artists make it, was it a significant work in the oeuvre, but I'm also giving them the independence to have their own interpretations, because every artist would say, the artwork is up there for people to build their own connections. So, when I was looking at this presentation, I did a Google search out of curiosity to look at art viewing patterns. And what crops up, the first thing that crops up actually is a research that was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where these two university professors found out that on an average, a viewer at a museum like the Met is spending less than 30 seconds before an artwork. So, how long or short is that? You can hardly delve deeper. You can barely look at the work or every corner of the work. I'm looking at that less than 30 seconds also as telling about what is the attention span of my readers. I probably have less than that time to engage with them, for them to read further. And, there has been some criticism with regard to art journalism recently on how it's not what it used to be in the 40s or 50s or the 60s and 70s. But I think what's also important to understand is that there's a changing role of the journalist. I'm not operating in the same space like a Rudy von Leyden or a Richard Baltimore. I'm operating in this moment where the ecosystem has completely changed. The image has probably gone viral before I'm writing about it. And it's more inclusive. There is more democratization that way, but there's also fragmentation. A lot of times there is this fake thing, even with art, and it goes viral and suddenly everyone's looking at if this artist actually made it in this year. So I'm looking at those things. So, going forward in this presentation, I will look at some works on how I would look at it as a journalist. As somebody who's catering to the masses, I am not sensationalizing it, I'm not dumping it down, because I'm also writing for an audience that are probably already familiar with the artwork. So, I have to keep a balance, and it's difficult to strike that balance always, but there's always an attempt to do that. So I look at it through some artworks that I have written about, some artworks which are more familiar also, and some less familiar. So I want to start with Amrita Shergill's The Storyteller. Many of us saw this work in the context of it being the most expensive artwork in Indian art right now, when it's sold in 2023 for 6.8 crores. 61.8 crores, 61.8 crores.
Plus tax.
Plus tax, okay. That's coming from a collector. Yes.
All over the world,
I know.
we put the final price. In India, we somehow...
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah. So for the sake of reportage, is the price that was given to us was 6.8 crore, 61.8 crore, and as Nitin has said, plus tax. Do you want to share how much would the tax be? Then people can calculate 12%. So, whosoever has good maths, please let us know what was the final figure. So we have somebody saying.
Just adding premium also for 18%.
No,
I see.
premium is included. So anyway, please.
No, yeah. No, that's fine. You know, the point is for engagement. I mean, that's what I'm looking at as a journalist. So, you know, all of us looked at this artwork and I obviously reported on it. And that is also a grievance against our journalism right now on how journalists are looking at price points. And market news is also gets headline. But you know, my thing is, why not? You know, when I'm looking at a profile or an exhibition, probably I will not talk about the prices. But in such a situation, I can't not. So you know, but what I will also do is contextualize this work for the readers then. Jyoti spoke about Amrita's works. I will not delve into the past, but you know, this is a moment when she's come to India. And we are looking at the influence of the Pahari tradition here. We are looking at, this is also a point when she's using a lot of sitters. So I'll point out to details like that so that the people can connect with the work. You know, for them it's not just a work which sold 61.8 crore plus tax, but also it is a work that, you know, they should get to know the artist through the piece, like they should get to know about the work. So another celebrated image that I thought I'll take is Krishan Khanna's Exodus. This is 2007. And I'm deliberately looking at a work which is not close to the partition but years later. You know, many of us know on how Krishan Khanna was deeply affected by the partition. In fact, he moved to India during the partition. He came to Shimla. So in this work, you know, he is looking at memories from a distant past, and yet they are so vivid in his mind. This is a work where he has the Tonga, and you know, we can see below the terrain, this difficult terrain. It's also probably, you know, the dark clouds. Or you know, there's so much baggage on the Tonga that we see. So this is also emotional baggage that he carries himself. So, you know, so over here I'm looking at a recent work but also connecting with his past. And by doing that, I want the readers to know him, to know his past. So here I have two images of Ghulam Muhammad Sheikh's work. Incidentally, his fabulous retrospective is on at the KNMA right now, which I haven't seen, but I completely intend to. So these are two works made by him a decade apart. And in both the works, he's talking about political crisis. And look at how differently he is placing these works, you know. The work Speechless City, which is in 1975, is made in the wake of the emergency. And it's a work which is so silent and yet it couldn't have been louder. We are looking at this city which is completely deserted, you know. The streets are occupied by animals. There are these birds flying, which could mean fleeing people. They want to just run away from the situation. And in the second work that we see, this is commenting on the communal riots which have already started in Gujarat and Baroda, a city that he lives in. And this canvas couldn't have been busier. You know, there are so many elements to it when we get on to looking at it. There's the vegetable vendor, there are these riots happening in one part of the city. And right at the center, you find Silsila. It's a movie that released in 1981. And Sheikh over here is seeing on how we are turning a blind eye, and you know, he's spoken about how the absurdity of the situation here and you know, the brutalization. So when I'm looking at a journalist, as a journalist to these works, and I'm writing about these, you know, I'm contrasting them. I'm talking about how the same artist is using different languages to comment on a political situation. I'm also talking about Sheikh's own past over here. Like, you know, he's growing up in a small, in Surendranagar in Gujarat, and he has often spoken about how he used to look forward to village feasts, and he incidentally studied Sanskrit, and he's read the Upanishads, the Vedas, and all of this has influenced his works. So, you know, why I showed all these works, it's also to show on how there is so much that an image is telling us. There are so many elements within that image to discover. Now I will look at some of my own articles, and I don't want to be self-indulgent here, but some of my own articles and the approaches that I took to engage the audience. So this is an article I did last year on Himmat Shah when his exhibition was on in Delhi. And he's a very well-respected artist, he's recognized, and yet he's someone that a lot of us admit hasn't gotten his due from the art world until recently. So, when I look at his practice, my starting point that I decided was to look at something that fascinated me about his practice. And I was hoping, or I'm still hoping, that the viewers found that as fascinating as me is the technique and the process which distinguishes him from so many other artists of his times. So I start with this anecdote or him using the cigarette butt and charring the paper with it, and that led to a series of work which were really celebrated. And going further in the article then, I spoke about more deliberate practice, as how he still has clay soaked in water, which is at his studio for years, just to strengthen the material. Now, this is a piece on Raza that I did when I'd gone to the Pompidou to look at his exhibition. I'd interviewed Raza Sahab on many occasions when he used to come to India often, or when he was still in France. And by the time when I went to Paris as a journalist, what I wanted to do is to capture the man in the city. I had written about Raza many times as the person in India, but Ashok Vajpayee had often said on how Raza said that what to paint he learned from India and how to paint in France. So I wanted to understand that how to paint. So I would go to, I went to his first art gallery, I went to the house where he stayed even if I couldn't enter. He was always immaculately dressed. So I tried to find out from where did he buy his clothes. Then I understood from somebody that he used to visit the mosque often. So I actually went and saw the mosque. Now, all of us, this would not have found a mention in my piece, but it did inform my piece, So then when I'm writing about his changing oeuvre in the city, when he's still working in France, it reflects in the work. And, it's not like no one had written about these things. Yashodhara has a wonderful book on Raza, and there's so many other books. But as a journalist, I thought this is something that would engage, that I found engaging, and I thought it will appeal to the readers to also know the man and what his life he led for so many years in France. Now, this is a completely different genre, and one that Anubhav spoke about, Jangan Sham. So this is a piece I did, I think around 20 years after his demise, and his 60th birth anniversary. So over here, the approach is different. I'm looking at the artwork of this artist who was discovered by Jagdish Swaminathan. I mean, he was just given a piece of paper and he suddenly turned the oral myths into these artworks that we saw. And not only did he himself come to Bhopal, but he trained generations of artists. And it was a completely new school that came about just because of that. So I spoke to the people who studied with him. I spoke to Bhaju Sham, I spoke to Venkat Sham, and tried to get an understanding of his practice. Of course, he died very young. So I wanted to also include this work. Umesh Singh is not a name that many people will know, after the names that I have taken. But what I'm trying to tell through this is also as an art journalist when I'm going, or as a person viewing art or looking at art when we go to places, we should not just look at what is already celebrated. We should also be making our own discoveries. We should also be looking beyond the main hall. What is outside of the main hall? What is the work which is not in the spotlight? So this is an artist whose works I saw at the Coach's Mrs. Biennale in 2019. And it was sheer curiosity, there were all these tools on the ground literally, and the image that you see, similar images were on the wall. So just out of curiosity, I tried to find out who is he. And what I discovered is that he lives in a village in Bihar, and all the tools that were there on display were actually tools of farmers who had left farming because they could no longer sustain themselves. His own father was now a security guard in Hyderabad, and he used to once, the whole family lived off farming months. So what I'm trying to say is when we go for these big events, or when I go to these big events as a journalist, it's important for us to look at art beyond what we are pointed to look at. So I want to end with a very different image. It's a Vincent van Gogh work. Now if you look at it carefully, this connects with what I was just saying. When you look at it carefully, it's called Red Cabbages and Garlic right now. But until 2023, for a decade for more than a century actually, it was called Red Cabbages and Onions. And in 2023, its title was changed just because of one museum visitor who decided not to just read the plaque but also question the plaque. So he was a Dutch chef. He went to the Amsterdam Museum, and what he observed was this is not looked like onions. He went back home, he googled how Vincent van Gogh had painted onions previously in his other works. He made a presentation, sent it to the museum in Amsterdam, and not only did the museum admit to the error, but they also rectified the title of the artwork.
Hi, thank you Ashok ji and also Raza Foundation for having me. I come from the perspective of a collector. I have also been writing. I had a column in HT for some time and then Business Standard for many years, and I write for every now and then for CSMVS Journal and so forth. So I just want to a lot has been said about different works and different categories of works, from the indigenous to really sort of high art like Van Gogh, and lots in the middle, conceptual and so on and so forth. I'm going to try and just put it all together and talk about 2 or 3 aspects of what it means to look, and not just look but also understand art. First is really, I think in India, very underappreciated are the formal aspects. Why in one particular exhibition of an artist is one work better than the other? Why does one work become seminal? Why does some work in an exhibition sell, some don't sell, some sell later? Who decides which work is better than the other? So I think many times we look at specific works of art and we don't realize why we like them more than others. And there are really formal aspects which I think, Jyoti touched upon, that simple things. What is the quality of the composition in the work? How is the color balanced in the work? Is the work too tight? Is it too loose? Is it getting distracted somewhere? Is it a successful composition? So when you look at, since we're in the Raza mode, when we see his work, for example, I'll just take from the early 80s to the late 80s. When you have these... You should reach your destination by 2012. Sorry. That's okay. Just from 1980 to 1990, you see a shift in Raza's work. You see the looser forms that he was working with in the 70s, then coming closer with a sort of soft geometry appearing and the form sort of coming into place. You then see the geometry increasing and you see these gestures going into the geometry, and then you reach this period of 84, 85 where the gesture and the geometry are perfectly in balance, and you have works like Saurashtra, for example, La Terre, Saurashtra and so forth, Rajasthan and all. And then as you go down to the 80s, you see that these geometry is taking over and becoming more predominant, and the gesture is beginning to get less place in it. So you really need to, one is to see the formal aspects. Second is to know the artist's own career and trajectory. I think we spoke about, what is going on in the artist's mind. If I put in front of you a late 1940s watercolor of Raza or Flora Fountain or, Gateway of India, and then took an early 50s work like Hot the Khan, which is without any gesture, just, and took a 1970s abstract work with a dark background with blotches and gestures around, and then took a Nag Bindu or a Germination, and I told you this is by the same artist. So chances are, even if we're looking, we might not be able to say it's by the same artist till we know what the artist's career was actually like. So I think to look and to understand, we also definitely need a little bit more. We need to know who the artist is and what the artist's journey is. Third is the aspect that Jyoti again spoke about, Vandana also spoke about. What is the context in which something was made? If you looked at an Yves Klein blue and you stood in front of it and you didn't know the context of what it was, chances are that your appreciation for the painting would be not as much as if you knew really what the context was. So here is the same viewer in front of the same painting by the same artist and is not able to really establish that corridor, so to say, because that corridor requires us to learn that language. And I'm communicating to you in English and you're able to comprehend what I'm speaking because I went 12 years and I learned English in school and then 3 years in college and then upped my vocabulary and repertoire over time. So I think it's the same thing in art. We think that we can look at something and understand it. You may or you may not. You may try to or you may not. You may think of it, understand it differently. People come up and say, oh, I don't like Hussain's horses. How many have you seen? Which ones have you seen? Have you seen the early ones? Do they have movement? Do they not have? What were they? Do you know the background? When he went to China, looked at Chinese paintings, etc., etc. So there's a whole context behind it. And we don't really, just looking and saying that we understand something is really not, the rules of seeing a work of art or enjoyment of a work of art or appreciating a work of art across mediums, across time, and if it's if it is Jangar Singh Sham, for example, what did he do? What he broke the barrier for what a traditional kind of composition would be. He was inventive. Kamladevi was inventive. That's why we like them more than we like. So there's a general skill of the artist, and then there is a mind that goes beyond just what they're painting. They're painting something different. So we need to understand and appreciate these things in order for us to enjoy specific works of art. I'm just going to stop it there, and if there are any questions, that someone wants to ask, please go ahead. Bye. So we average the time.
Hello, thank you very much. I enjoyed all the four panelists. I have a friend and I forwarded an image of a painting by Paul Klee possibly, and her response was that I was pretentious, in that she said that if I draw something, you would not find meaning in the painting, but since it's Paul Klee, you do. My question is, how important is the physical context? So we looked at beautiful paintings today. If those paintings were placed in a small hotel, in a small town, and the names were not there, we did not know who the artists were, would we look at those paintings differently?
You know, it's a really interesting question, and I'm going to say that's when the kind of understanding of viewing comes, that a person who's learned that language or has that natural sensibility, for example, can go out and find on a simple wall, can locate a jewel. On the other hand, you can have something very mediocre, which we have oftentimes, made to look much bigger and much more precious and much more important in very, grand spaces. Museums could be one of them. And a simple object, maybe not so great, can get more importance. But all these things are for the short run. In the long run, everything evens out. Great works of art, just what is work of art? It elits and it gives you, you have an emotional response to it. So when you look at something, you respond to something. And it's that emotion, and the kind of emotion that we have is why, collectors buy work, or museums put works for which people pay for tickets and come and see it. If they would not give you that response, people wouldn't be queuing up, and so on and so forth. Why is it that we have people on wheelchairs on rainy days with umbrellas and tickets and bookings and time slots in museums abroad, and we don't have that here? Because we've not initiated enough people into the whole way of looking at art. Once that initiation has happened, in my office, if a work of art comes and it's really good, for example, or something really amazing, even a driver or a peon or anyone, a secretary can just, the minute it's open, ye to bahut badhiya hai. What is it that they have found in it, or they are able to find in it? And this is a great benefit for somebody like me. I also collect miniature painting, and very, very often the sellers think all of them look exactly the same. But this is infinitely better than something else, because you can see something in it. And not only me, if I show it to other people who know it, people come to my house and there are modern paintings and there are court paintings, 16th to 19th century paintings. People who understand or appreciate modern paintings look at the modern paintings. They just, great curators, writers, don't even look or comment on the miniature paintings. And it's the reverse from the other side. So it's what and how much, has one, what is the repertoire that we have developed or built up, where we can learn, where we can appreciate across genres, whether it's a Japanese screen, or it's a Chinese painting, or it's a Deccani object, or it's a Mughal textile. What is it that we need to develop or see that we can appreciate everything? So it's possible, and it does happen, and it's just that we need to be more aware of it. That's all. I mean, I hope it answered the question. Yes, Yashodhara.
Thank you, all of you, for very interesting discourses. I was wondering if, other than, an instinctive ability to appreciate form and color, and also, of course, knowing the context of the work of art, is there also a kind of hidden prejudice about looking at works of art? For instance, we've had several major shows of Indian art, modern Indian art abroad, the most recent being the magnificent Raza show at the Pompidou Center. Yet, I would say we've not made a dent in the global art world. Would you agree with that?
I'll say two things. Firstly, personally, I went to see the Raza retrospective and I was absolutely disappointed, me personally, because I really appreciate a lot of his early work, but I really think that he his real time was the 80s for me, when he really got, we confuse vintage with quality, and that's not entirely, it's correct for some artists, but some artists it was later. I don't like early Tayyab as much as I like later Tayyab, and I can't enjoy Tayyab from the 80s as much as I like the flat ones from the 90s. And so they are later, the condition is better always, because he painted in acrylic and he didn't dip the brush in kerosene, and I can't enjoy that work as much. So I didn't like the Raza retrospective as much. It was Raza, it was at the Centre Pompidou, but I think if the curator had understood the context in which Raza was, or understood it a little bit more, or worked with an Indian curator at the same time, I think the outcome would have been, and the selection of works would have been dramatically different. I would have done the show slightly, not slightly, very, very differently. Not so much focus on the early work, but on the late work. Having said that, there is a general museum or institutional guilt in the West of not having looked at works of art outside of, Europe and America for a very, very long time. Society has changed, travel has changed, democratized, Instagram has sort of democratized taste, art fairs. When you're walking in an art fair, which is now a part of the art world, so to say, and you're walking down an aisle and you look at an Israeli artist or an Indian artist or a Chinese artist 1 year and the second year and the third year, and it's sitting alongside something else which is, blue chip European, but it's giving you the same emotion, then you say, I don't care, I really like it. I mean, I remember when I was in London in the 1990s, Anish Kapoor was making his reputation then, and becoming a really important artist at that time. And I asked a collector, I'm like, he said, you're Indian and I have an Indian, artist's work. That time he would call himself Indian, now he doesn't call himself Indian, now he's completely British, which is fine. And I said, why did you buy work? He said, I have a Donald Judd and I have an Anish Kapoor and they give me the same vibration. So he looked at it from a point of view of what that artwork is doing for him. So just to go back, we have had retrospective of Nasreen, of Zarina Hashmi. We have museums now trying to collect Indian works, whether it's the Tate or the Metropolitan or Houston or Cincinnati or etc., V&A, etc. So there is this thing to make up for, and it's not only India. If we saw the Venice Biennale was an absolute proof of the fact that a curator completely disregarded what we know is to be great art, and did a lot of the art from the southern hemisphere, Aboriginal art and so on, from all across the world. And it was to my mind, it was a sensational Venice Biennale for me. So the biases have been there, the biases are being corrected, and will continue to do so. Also, as India gains economic superiority over time. We have Arpita Singh's retrospective coming up at the Serpentine. So we'll see, which is next month, we'll see more and more of this happening as things, as time goes by. Yes, sir.
I think plagiarism is a big issue.
Sorry?
Plagiarism.
I think it's a big issue everywhere, and it's very easy. It's very easy to plagiarize.
But some people do it themselves just to make a controversy also. Is it true?
I don't know how it's relevant in the ways of looking discussion today, but and I don't know if anybody plagiarizes their own work and so forth. But
futile kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think Ashokji had a question.
You wanted to say?
No, I'm saying you had a question.
Thank you. Yeah.
I wanted to carry this a bit more.
Yes.
So is there this Euro-American prejudice
Yes.
about modern art?
Yes.
Do you feel that it is somewhat depleted, that despite the fact that this we do have a presence in museums, in big shows.
I think generally there is, forget Europe and America, within Europe and America, the top 5-7 institutions, 70-80% of the works that they show in the retrospectives or major exhibitions are from 3 galleries or 4 galleries in the world. So that's how concentrated and how much power important galleries now have. So that's just the ecosystem at the moment, the way it is. I think there is generally a lot more openness to looking at not only India, but there was abstraction in the Middle East in the 1950s, which is absolutely spectacular, and you put it together with anything else in the world and it holds its own, the things in Africa or South America or XYZ. So we'll continue to keep on discovering these things. Who was that Helma of Klint, the woman artist, who was, artist in the early part of the 20th century, never continued to make work but sort of mandated that her work should never be shown anywhere. And, they just looked at the work now, and the Tate did a retrospective, and it was an absolute revelation that somebody like this, existed at that time, and what was the art world's perception to women at that time, for example. So it could be a bias towards women, it could be a bias towards, colored people, it could be bias towards, people from their world and so on and so forth. But I think over time, a lot of it is getting, evened out.
That contest, Jean Michel.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Louis Bourgeois, absolutely.
They were never shown that way. They were
Absolutely.
never recognized that way.
Absolutely.
But afterwards, they are fantastic artists.
Absolutely.
They are, in this context, I would like to say, they are not women artists.
They're artists. Absolutely. 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 I mean, Chester Hurwitz, when he used to come to India, and he would come in, Chester and Davida would come in December and spend 1 month and hoover up all of the Indian, all the artists that they liked, and artists like Nilima, Arpita and all were bringing up children and also painting as well. You see, Nilima's works are all small format because that's, what she was doing at that. Once the children were brought up, and you see these large scrolls and, things like that. But he came to Paramjeet to look at his work, and he said, what do you do? He asked he asked her. And Arpita said, I'm also a painter. He said, I want to look at your work. And there were only works on paper, and she took them from under the bed, and he didn't buy any Paramjeet's work, and he bought all of Arpita's work, and and never bought a Paramjeet ever, but continued to collect Arpita's work. So, that's just the way it was in those days.
They were also very small because they used to travel in trains with artworks. Like that were the earliest exhibitions of these women artists.
I don't know that about Arpita.
No,
or even maybe.
Arpita I think was part of the group. There was Madhvi Parekh, there was I think Nalini Malani. There were these women artists who had the earliest exhibitions traveling by train, and they used to roll up their works and take. So which is also how, I spoke to them and they said that's why they were small, or they were something that they could roll up and take.
Yes, it's like Dhawan's works were always small in Paris because he would go and paint in the countryside, and he would bring it back in the train, so he could take big work, and, so.
Yeah, I wanted to add something.
I'll just come and sit down. Thank you.
Yashodhara was talking about South Asian art coming up more in museums. So right now there's also this whole bit for inclusivity from a lot of international museums, and we're seeing that in a big way in the US, where they've actually set up departments for native art. So it's focusing on Native American art, essentially, because it's First Nations art. But the whole idea is that eventually they are looking at other countries also, at other cultures also, and their First Nations art in that kind of a way. So, which means that a lot of all of 5 years before and after this whole thing that has come up, the whole complexion of certain departments will change. Like if you were to look at a collection in 2020 versus 2030 of any major American museum, you will see a lot more a lot more from the global south. and from indigenous cultures and communities versus previously.
And I also think just one last thing. I also certain artists, I don't think you can call Bhayanita Singh an Indian artist in a sense. She sort of holds her own anywhere in the world. You can't say that there's any sort of ethnicity or any Indianness attached to it. You could show her in any museum in the world, and nationality is not something that would even come up for anybody, So we have to look at that aspect as well.
Well, friends, hopefully you would have learned a thing or two about how to look at art a little more seriously, a little more attentively. I am reminded of two things. One, in I think 1984, a curator from Pompidou came to Bharat Bhavan. At that point of time, they're looking for works for a major exhibition that Pompidou was to launch later in the year. It was called Magicians of the Earth. And finally, he selected Jangar Singh Shyam and perhaps one more. And the cover of the catalogue and the main poster of the catalogue carried Jangar Singh Shyam's work. So this was way back in 1984, where Pompidou itself, and it is said that that exhibition for the first time, then the French set up a whole new museum. And interestingly, the French do not call it aboriginal or this, they call it primary art. So the museum is called Museum of Primary Art, which means that this art is the primary art. So it's sort of, in a manner of speaking, this is what Swaminathan did in Bharat Bhavan. The only institution in independent India which had both the urban arts and the folk and rural artists of the same museum. So that was the path breaking. It was to define the contemporary, that those who are working, whether in cities or kasbas or villages or jungles or wherever, they are all contemporary. The notion that the folk and tribal are somehow historically backward or left behind, this, he used to say, tribals live not in poverty, but in austerity. We don't need this notion of poverty, we are important. He discovered the Pahari Korvas. I mean, the Pahari Korvas were totally unlettered, but they used to make these and let a word, a letter float. So Swami was quite amazed कि पढ़े लिखे तो है नहीं, तो ये अक्षर कहाँ से इनको? Now, upon his visit there and talking to them, he discovered that they thought that Patwari, the forest guard, the policemen, have power because they have language, they have letters. So they used to float those. And if you remember, that impacted Swami's own art practice. The last exhibition that he held, you had works in which the letter was floating. And I remember it distinctly. This was early 94, I think, a few months before he passed away. So it has been a way of, and how these have interacted and got mixed up and all that. When we had an exhibition, at that time we used to deride Delhi in Bharat Bhavan, because Bharat Bhavan had in a single year a footfall of 1 lakh in the very first year. The footfall, the combined footfall of National Gallery, National Museum and Crafts Museum was less than 1 lakh. तो ये शायद दिल्ली वाले क्या है, इनको आर्ट वार्ट कोई समझ में थोड़ी आता। हमारा शहर समझता है आर्ट। देखो 10% of the population visits an art center, but that was a fact at that time. The short point is that just as there are different ways of making art, there are such a variety of art practices, there is also different ways of looking at art. The only thing is, don't look at in hurry. Don't look at, if you're busy, don't come just for the drink and the samosas or whatever. Don't be so unethical as to pass through. Art wants you to halt, to stop for a minute or two and respond. You may find that the artwork is useless. Well, there are any number of useless works being shown all over the world. After all, if you look at the percentage of the really important and the really great or the really outstanding or the really path-breaking, there will not be more than 10%. And there's a lot of mediocre art and there's a bad art. And you have every right to reject it. But having seen that art carefully, paying attention to it, and this is what we are trying to do, we hope to continue this series by restarting our earlier Looking at Art series, in which we will request one person to talk about one work for 40 minutes, bore you to death if it should be, and allow you to resurrect with some understanding and some intelligence. Thank you very much for being with us. Go now to your St. Valentine. If you should.
Sir, Nath is very close to you.
Could have been fire.